Welcome to season 2 of the NAPABA Coffee House, brought to you by the generous support of our sponsors. I'm Priya Aiyar, Executive Director of NAPABA. This season, NAPABA Coffee House conversations focus on how AA and HPI leaders, especially women, have reached positions of prominence across various industries and their paths to power. This season is hosted by legal legend and trailblazer Deborah Wong Yang, who is no stranger herself to forging new paths to power in the legal industry. She has been an integral part of the NAPABA family since its founding, and we are thrilled to have her lead this season of thought-provoking conversations with AA and HPI luminaries. Deb will be speaking today with Priya Aiyar, Chief Legal Officer for American Airlines. Priya has been with American since 2019, and she oversees all aspects of the company's legal affairs and strategies. She talks about her career path and the critical mentorship and leadership styles she was exposed to as a young attorney, including those modeled by the judges she clerked for, now Attorney General Merrick Garland during his time on the D.C. Court of Appeals, and former Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer. Public service has been a hallmark of her career, having served as acting general counsel and deputy general counsel for the U.S. Department of Treasury, as deputy general counsel for the U.S. Department of Energy, and as deputy chief counsel to the National Commission on the BP Deepwater Horizon oil spill. One theme that we're really hearing about this season is that not only do the hard skills and soft skills matter for success, but relationship and human skills matter just as much. I was struck by how often Priya referenced that as she was helping one of the world's largest airlines navigate its way through a pandemic that devastated global travel. In addition to discussing strategies for working with in-house counsel, Priya also outlines the crucial role of diversity and inclusion in an industry that has global reach, employs thousands of people from different cultures, yet has traditionally been siloed in terms of job opportunities. I'm proud that NAPABA programming, including this coffee house series, and our in-house counsel network can serve as resources to create a supportive community for AA and HPI attorneys to break through and succeed. Grab a cup of coffee and stay tuned.
Okay, good morning. Priya Aiyar is here with us today. She's the Chief Legal Officer at American Airlines. Priya, I want to thank you for your time today. Spent a little bit of time reading about your background, which is so fascinating and so interesting and incredibly varied. I dare say that you've been sort of at the seat of lots of different things that have been important to this country. But before we start off, I know our listeners and our viewers always want to know a little bit about you. Can you give them a little bit about your background here?
Sure. Well, I'll start by saying, Deborah, thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be on. So in terms of my background, I grew up in Northern California, went to college and law school on the East Coast, and then spent really the bulk of my career in D.C., both at a law firm and in government. I was in the Obama administration for pretty much the full 8 years. And then since 2019 have been general counsel and now chief legal officer at American Airlines, which, as you can imagine, the last 4 years of the airline industry has been a wild ride, but, an absolutely fantastic opportunity for me.
No, and it's been interesting because you've been in government and out of government and back out of government and then into private industry. So you've really had that ability to sort of have your feet in lots of different places. And I'm just wondering, one of the things is that we really want to reach out to some of our younger lawyers in our community and let them see what that path looks like, and let them see sort of as a younger lawyer, how you're developing those skills. Because I sort of feel like the beauty of it is that as you get older and build a patina, there also comes expertise, right? And great knowledge that comes with that. And so I'm curious, like, some of the earlier positions that you had, the kinds of things that you felt like you learned from or that were takeaways for you that were helpful for you as you sit at American Airlines today?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a fantastic question. So for me, coming out of law school, I knew I wanted to be a litigator. And I had sort of an academic orientation. I enjoyed research and writing. And so I wanted to, do some appellate work. And so I clerked and I had the great fortune of clerking for two, amazing judges, Merrick Garland, who of course is now our Attorney General, and Stephen Breyer on the U.S. Supreme Court. So, those were obviously really formative learning experiences for me. And, I feel like whatever level you clerk at, whether it's state court, federal district court, appellate court, I feel like, you never, it's a really unique opportunity earlier in your career to kind of sit at the elbow of someone who's really at the top of the legal profession and learn from them and kind of get their perspective on, what successful advocacy is and kind of how they interact with lawyers. And if you are clerking at a trial court, you see how they interact with, parties, witnesses, how they manage a docket. And so I felt like that was just really invaluable experience. And then also, had the great benefit of kind of enabling me to develop relationships with, two mentors who, then for the rest of my career, Judge Garland was always the first person I called when I had, was debating about what to do next in my career. And they're real like lifetime relationships. And again, not only with the judges, but with the whole kind of community of clerks that you get to know.
I want to pause on that for just a moment and do a little bit of a deeper dive, because I think you're touching on something that is so meaningful. And maybe I'm a little nostalgic right now. I clerked at the district court, and actually this weekend I'm going to the memorial services for my judge. And, it's like my legal family.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I know that you have that even more so. But I want to talk to you about, when you're at that younger age and you're exposed to these phenomenal individuals. And, for you, they're titans of the industry, and some of our greatest thinkers. And so that's really unique and special. But in that, I find that you also learn things like leadership, like how to actually be a mentor, how to engage with people of all different ages, how to have a philosophy where you're open-minded, things that are sort of unstated, but when you're young, we're sponges and we're just picking all of that up. And so I'm curious, as you worked, with both Merrick Garland and Justice Breyer, the kinds of things that you saw that you thought to yourself as a young Priya, those are the kinds of things that I would like to emulate, because they're great qualities, or you could see how they would be great qualities. I'm curious sort of, what sort of things you felt or that you amassed, when you were at a younger age.
Yeah. So, I mean, those are fantastic questions. And maybe I'll talk about each of them. So I think they both modeled kind of, exactly how you would want to be, kind of as a senior senior statesman, but senior lawyer in the profession. And so Judge Garland, I think one thing, he is just incredibly disciplined and, attentive to detail, and just really dug into the weeds of every case we were working on. But at the same time, treated us all, as equals, and even though we weren't. And so, he just loved to engage with us on the details of a case. We would put together binders for him with kind of all the cases cited in the briefs and all the materials and just huge volumes of stuff, the entire administrative record. He would dig through the whole thing. He would, tab it all up. And then, you would write, a draft of an opinion, or you would, have thoughts on how something should come out. And he would just, you would just go back and forth about it. He would play devil's advocate a lot. And so I think it kind of taught me both kind of how to display that kind of open-mindedness and, coming to a case without any kind of presuppositions, but also just really the discipline to kind of really learn everything that was relevant to the case. But again, just the willingness to engage with people, who who, and again, we were not on his level, right? Like we knew nothing. We were coming out of law school, but he treated our opinions and views about the case just as seriously, as his own. And, I mean, I think 99% of the time when we disagreed, he was completely right. We were completely wrong. But sometimes, we might find something that he hadn't thought of, right? Or we might, draw something to his attention, make him think about something in a different way. And I think, he was so open to that. And so I think, really modeled that. And, Justice Breyer was, really the same way, and kind of, Justice Breyer had been an academic. He had kind of a professorial style, again, loved to debate, very open-minded. And he would, our offices were right next to his. And when he was thinking about a case, he would just, wander into your office and just start batting ideas back and forth. Sometimes we would have like other clerks from other chambers, like in the office chatting with us. And we'd be like, what, I don't know if you should be talking about this in front of them, but no, he didn't care. He just, and he wanted to know what they thought too, right? He just, again, he really thrived on that kind of, that engagement. And it helped you build your confidence too, because, it's difficult to tell a Supreme Court justice, like, you think they're wrong about something, right? And I remember, the first time I did it, or he had some view about a case, and I thought it was wrong. And I had talked to the clerks in the other chambers, and we had this heated discussion, and I was like, well, Justice, like, Justice Ginsburg and Justice O'Connor, like, they all see it this way, and I see it this way, and you see it this other way. And, but he was like, okay. And we had this really great debate about it. So I think it just, and again, modeled how you want to act when you get more senior in your career, but also kind of helped you develop the confidence to realize that, like, hey, you're junior, you're less experienced, but you're smart, and you might know this case better than anyone else, because you're the one who spent, the weeks digging into it. And so you have something to value and to contribute, and you shouldn't be afraid to speak up.
It sounds like that it's that unabashed desire to be intellectual about something, to really get to the heart. It doesn't matter who's speaking, or where the opinion is coming from, but if it's valuable data, that they were open to that, and that the process of having this intellectual debate was so key, which I think it feels like, to me, that's something that you've kept with you. Because the one thing that struck me when I was doing a little bit of reading about your background is just how varied your experiences have been. And the thing, as you were describing the process that you went through with Judge Garland, made me think about your experience when you were doing the counsel work for the Deepwater case, right? I mean, it was a very unique kind of situation, but something where it sounded as if you really needed to have a wholesale understanding of an area that probably you didn't have any experience in before. But first of all, could you sort of describe what your role was in that, and then maybe talk about really the process and how you kind of went through the task that you were, asked to do by the president?
Yeah, sure. So my role there was serving as one of the deputy chief counsels to this presidential commission that President Obama set up kind of after the Deepwater Horizon spill happened. And, the spill was still ongoing while we started our work. I mean, as you remember, it took, months to stop the spill. But so we were tasked with kind of on the same model as the 9/11 Commission, which was, kind of the commission that, whose work everyone was really familiar with, of kind of investigating what happened and putting together a report for the president in a year, kind of explaining how we think this happened and what the recommendations are for, preventing something like this from ever happening again. But, part of the tricky thing about it was, of course, there was ongoing huge litigation, civil litigation, criminal litigation, and, which was going to take way more than a year to resolve. And so we couldn't, we couldn't interfere with any of that, and we couldn't prejudge any of that. We just had to kind of report the facts and report our recommendations. And so, and then my specific focus was on kind of the, everything that happened kind of after the oil started spilling, like the effort to contain the well, and then the effort to, the response effort and the cleanup effort. And, what was, I mean, there were a ton of things that were really fascinating about the job. One thing was that, as litigators often do, you have to just learn an area that absolutely nothing about. And I remember when, someone when I got recruited to kind of join the commission, I said to the person who was calling me, like, I don't know anything about oil and gas law or any of this stuff. And they said, don't worry about it. This is really about like deep water drilling technology. And literally there's like 4 people in the world who really understand this stuff, right? And so like, you're just going to have to learn it like everyone else. And we did. And, and the advantage of being kind of at a government commission like that is everyone will talk to you. So you have access to kind of so you just figure out like, okay, these are like the 10 world leading experts on this technology. And, I'm going to ask them to meet with us, and they all will, right? And they'll all kind of share what they know. And then the other kind of interesting aspect of it is that, it was really, it was just sort of top line news every day, what we were working on. And so just kind of being prepared that everything you did, there would be a huge level of scrutiny on, and just a lot of public interest in. So I remember kind of before we put out our final report, we put out various like preliminary papers along the way. In my team, we put out a bunch of papers one day, and, we did it. They were kind of staff papers. They hadn't been voted on. They weren't official. We didn't necessarily think they would get a lot of attention, but then no, they got a ton of attention. And like the next morning, the White House press secretary got asked like 20 questions about our papers at his press conference. We're like, whoa, we actually like didn't expect this. And so it was kind of good training in how to work on something that high profile.
Yeah, and I remember back in the time when Deepwater happened, there was also a lot of scrutiny on the oil and gas industry anyway, because there had been different kinds of things that had happened at refineries. I think there had been somebody beforehand who had tried to do a comprehensive examination, at least on behalf of the government, to understand what was going on. But this was very different because of the type of drilling that it was. And it was something I think that was very new and different to the American diet. And so as somebody who was digesting all the kinds of data and facts that you guys were spinning out, I found it really quite interesting because the kinds of things that we think about as Americans, how to run a successful business, watching risk as you do it, having a value for, human life, trying to do things domestically, so that there's, less dependence on international things. Just all of that was sort of like coming to light all through sort of this one thing that had occurred and brought it to the American public. So, thank you for that work. It was really interesting, but, I can hear from that, this sense that I know that I've often said to people that my time in government is exponentially increased the kind of lawyer that I was, because it exposed me to so much and I learned so much that I wouldn't have had in a different kind of experience. And it sounds like the Deepwater thing was really that for you. I mean, the politics, the media part of it, the topical part of it, the really trying to represent us as United States citizens to try to figure out the best way to course through. It's very honorable, the kind of work that you were doing. And I'm sure it sounds like some of that was resonating through you and really kind of probably helped form the core of sort of the way you look at things as you move forward.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. You said it really well. I mean, as you, of course, know, there's no kind of greater privilege than kind of representing the people of the United States, right? And so, both at the Oil Spill Commission and kind of my other roles in government, when I was at the Treasury Department, for example, you just work on things that are so high stakes and that just matter to such a large number of people. I mean, I think, and I feel now at American Airlines, the stuff I work on is incredibly important, but, it's very hard to kind of have the impact in the private sector that you can have in government. So
yeah, and I'll jump into the American Airlines stuff in just a moment, but I didn't want to not pause for a second because what I saw in some of the work that you were doing was not just the intellectual rigor that you were bringing to it, and also some of the inventiveness, because there have been situations where the kinds of positions that you've had, there isn't a script for it, right? And I think we'll talk about it in a second, but with American Airlines and COVID, there was no script. Nobody saw that coming, right? But at the core of it, I find that there's this part of you, at least what I perceive, and I wanted to talk to you about it for just a moment, where you're very giving. There's a part of you that cares deeply about the public, I saw that your mother was a pediatrician and worked her way, through that. I saw that your father was a professor of statistics, both positions where there's a lot of giving and a lot of taking care of others, and a deep, deep desire to help others sort of come forward and be better and be their best selves. So I'm wondering, are there traces of that? Are there pieces of that sort of bleed into the person that you are today and the way that you address your work? Because, you're at a point now where you've had lots of different kinds of opportunities. And so, you will have choices today, tomorrow, and moving forward into the future, but where that core of you sort of resonates and how that manifests itself.
Yeah, no, well, that's really kind of you to say, and that's a great question. And yeah, I mean, I think I have always kind of wanted to be part of organizations that are mission driven. And I have always seen, I mean, people don't always see the law as a helping profession in the way that, doctors and teachers and such are, but I think it really is. It's a service profession, and you get to choose, who you're going to be in service to, right? And so, in government, I felt like I really enjoyed being part of that kind of mission-driven culture where kind of it was clear who we were in service to, and it was clear what goals we were trying to achieve. But I feel that in American Airlines too. I feel like, we are in service to kind of taking care of our customers, taking care of our team members, kind of being stewards of this great company. And I think everyone, I work with has a really strong kind of mission orientation. And I think that's a way in which, for me, I think being in-house is kind of more like being in government than, being in a law firm was. Because in a law firm, of course, you're always serving your clients, but kind of they all have different missions, and they're all kind of doing different things. And so you have, you don't quite have as much focus on kind of like what your goals as a professional are. I mean, or they vary from case to case and from client to client.
Yeah. And I had read somewhere where you actually said that one difference that you found with going in-house is that you're actually in a place where you can do the good today to prevent things from happening in the future, right? As opposed to, I manage crises in private practice now. And so it's already happened by the time that, it hits my table. So talk to us a little bit about that, because that's a vision and that's an opportunity that not a lot of us get if we're not in-house. And that's something very different.
Yeah, no, I think you said it exactly right. I felt when I was a litigator in private practice, I feel like, I worked on a lot of, as I'm sure you do, a lot of cases, a lot of internal investigations where things were going like completely awry. And you were like, wow, if you had called me 2 years ago, maybe you wouldn't be in this situation now, right? And I feel like now I'm in-house, I have the opportunity to kind of be embedded with our business teams from the beginning and kind of prevent those situations from happening. And, and I find that really rewarding. I mean, I find the kind of counseling part of the role really rewarding, where I don't feel like people are just, and it's not just me, but all of our legal team. I don't, people aren't just bringing us in at the end, or we aren't kind of a hurdle they have to jump over at the kind of end of a project or whatever. We kind of are partnering with our business clients from the beginning and helping them kind of, accomplish their goals in a way that mitigates risk as much as possible. Yeah. And I mean, I think, lawyers in private practice can do that too. I think it's, it can be more difficult, but, a lot of our outside counsel who we work with, they have really long-standing relationships with the company. We've worked with them for, 15 years, 20 years, 25 years. So they know the business as well as most of us do. And, they too can help us in kind of spotting issues early, preventing problems from arising in the first place, that sort of thing. But it is harder when you're kind of outside and you don't, you aren't living it day to day in the way that in-house lawyers are.
Yeah. And I think I think sometimes one of the ways that, and I don't know if you feel the same way, one of the ways that you can sort of get around that or sort of have that same sort of satisfaction is by getting involved in different sort of bar organizations or different causes. I know that our work with the Alliance. It gives me great satisfaction to have my law firm and Zakia and myself, dedicating that kind of time to really, trying to combat, AAPI, hate and giving support to the victims. And I know that American Airlines and you've been supportive of that, and we thank you for that. But there's those kinds of things that exist that, sort of permeate through private practice, being out in the public, being in, government, all those kinds of things. They cut through all of that because they have sort of commonalities and common goals. And so I feel like sometimes those kinds of opportunities can afford younger people the ability to sort of feel that way and to make that contribution. I don't know if that's something that you've seen too.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that. I've always found that kind of community involvement and pro bono work to be really kind of an important part of both, well, feeling like you're being of service, but also just feeling kind of personally fulfilled in your career. And at American, since I've got here, I've tried to kind of build our pro bono program. And I think one thing that we've tried to do here is kind of align with some of the initiatives that the company as a whole has. So, one of our efforts, for example, is around preventing human trafficking, which is, obviously has been a focus of the company for a long time, being in the transportation industry. And so, we partnered with a nonprofit that allowed us to provide legal services to victims of trafficking. And so kind of finding that kind of alignment where it's not just the lawyers, but you're kind of part of a larger effort. But I also think, as you said, pro bono work is just a great also opportunity as a young lawyer to develop your skills. I mean, you can argue an appeal, you can do things that, you wouldn't maybe otherwise be able to do.
Yeah. Well, let's switch to American Airlines and the COVID stuff that really affected you guys greatly. But let me give a little bit of background. So Priya joined American Airlines, I think in August of 2019, right? And within 6 months, later, really COVID kind of hit America and hit the world. And I really think that the airline industry was sort of on the front line of industries that were affected. It really kind of turned things upside down. I mean, we all froze in place, and it really was an existential crisis for us in the world, but for you at American in particular. I mean, because all of a sudden the population who had been moving and, getting from one place to another every day. I mean, I know myself, I traveled 42 weeks out of the year before COVID, right? And then I went down to 0. I've never been at home that much in my life. And everybody was like that. But tell us the kind of problems that sort of like as they sort of presented themselves to you, and sort of what you had to do from wearing the chief legal officer hat and trying to resolve them for your company, because really there were companies that went under. There are a lot of businesses that were lost, or some businesses that still haven't recovered. We're still making our way out of it. So, but back in, the end of 2019, the beginning of 2020, what did that look like for you, and sort of what were you facing? Because it was unprecedented.
Yeah, no, terrific question. So, I mean, you're absolutely right. It was unprecedented. It was a real black swan crisis for the industry. And I mean, we're obviously an industry that has had a lot of crises, and a lot of my colleagues, lived through 9/11 and lived through the Great Recession, other things, but COVID really, just in the magnitude of the impact on the industry and just the length of time, was really unique. So I think, I think, as obviously a company with a frontline workforce, and a workforce that was out there when everyone else was kind of, hunkering down at home, we kind of had to focus on, okay, what are our kind of immediate priorities, things we need to do, kind of then what are our medium term and what are our longer term priorities. And immediate priorities are like, how do we keep our team members and customers safe? So, putting in place like a whole host of new kind of safety measures, and then figuring out, okay, now every, country, state and local government, like there's this huge new slew of travel restrictions and COVID regulations, and how do we make sure we comply with those? How do we work with our operational folks? Those are changing literally like every hour. How do we make sure that the advice that, we're giving in the legal department is getting translated to the gate agent who has to decide whether someone can board a flight or not, right? So that's a huge project. So, and then of course, figuring out how are we going to pull our flying down, working with our operations team on, how we're an 85% unionized workforce. So we have, when we kind of, when we pull flying down and when we have to furlough people, there's like a whole process we go through for that. So obviously working on that. But then, in the medium term, we also worked really closely with our government affairs team on, getting support from the federal government, which we did ultimately get. And then once we got it, it was in the form of, grants and loans from the Treasury Department. And so negotiating kind of the terms of those grants and loans. And then also what that support enabled us to do is keep all of our employees on payroll. So all the people who, we were going to furlough now, we didn't need to furlough them, which was amazing, but we had to figure out how to reverse all of that, how to make sure people's paychecks, arrived on time. It was a huge effort. And then kind of while you're doing all that stuff, kind of longer term, look towards the future and make sure that, you're bringing down the airline in a way that's going to enable you to bring it back up in a way that is actually improved and makes sense, right? And so again, working closely to give advice to our operational team, our commercial teams on all that stuff. And then, working with our finance team on raising, they raised over $20 billion in the capital markets. I mean, as you can imagine, just huge array of different work streams going on.
What lessons do you think from that whole experience, really sort of are ones that you kept and that, that you would use, as you move forward, sort of like things that you learned from that experience that helps you, become your next better self, circa 3 years down the road, right?
Yeah. So I would say one thing I learned was, I think, kind of the importance of being like transparent and open kind of with your team, with, all of your employees. I think, during COVID, obviously like a personally difficult time for lots of people but like especially difficult for people in our industry where people are like, oh my God, is the company going to exist? Are we going to go bankrupt? Am I going to lose my job? And I think just being really open with information helped a lot with that. And, our CEO, our leadership team really like led that effort in terms of, just had a lot more calls than we would normally have, just a lot of pushing out as much information as we could, just, kind of keeping everyone informed and not sugarcoating things, but kind of helping people understand kind of what the path forward was in terms of how we were going to get through this as a company, I think was really important. And then I think one thing that I didn't do as good of a job as I should have, and, will want to do better if, well, God forbid this ever happens again, right? But I felt like it was harder for me to have a sense of how like everyone on my team was doing when, everyone was working at home and we're in the midst of this crisis. And, I think just checking in with people, just, how they're doing personally and professionally. And I tried to do that a lot, but again, it's hard when you don't see people at the office or, you just don't casually see them like you would. And I felt like, definitely, there are always going to be people on your team who are going to, just be having a hard time, right, with a crisis like this, and just making sure that you kind of are spotting that and doing what you can to help them through it.
That's a really, really good point, Priya. And I think that's something that that I saw too. And that I, like you, didn't recognize it while it was actually happening, because, I'm on Zooms and, what I see is what I sort of thought was going on. And, afterwards, with time, I started to see people who were, suffering, or you didn't know it. And, there were things going on in their homes and you just didn't know. And because we weren't thinking about proactively asking them, are you okay? Is everything all right? It just didn't, there was no safety valve for them. There's no other person to listen. And I think as we, move into a world where there's going to be adaptations of things that happened during COVID that we take moving forward, I dare say Zoom is going to be with us for a long, long time. But, with that great gift, there's some things that are missing. And I think it's great advice from you to be conscious about that, because I think even for myself, I would take that advice, because some of the things that I've seen resonate very much with what it is that you've observed. Let me ask you, we have a number of people that, work in-house, and it's very different when you go in-house. And so, there are, I think, different ways to succeed within a corporation. And I don't know whether or not some of the hard skills or soft skills that are required in a company. It's the one job I've never had. What they are, and maybe you could flag some of those for just people to think about and be sensitive to as they sort of build their own careers in-house.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the hard skills are kind of very similar to what you need to succeed in a law firm or in government. I mean, you need the kind of expertise in your area. And I think especially, and I think, some companies were maybe different, but I think most companies are kind of like us. And, we don't typically hire people who are a couple of years out of law school. We hire people with a fair amount of experience, and we hire them kind of as experts in particular areas, right? So that kind of expertise is a prerequisite for many of these roles. But I think some of the skills that may be more relevant in-house than in other roles are, I feel like, when you're in a law firm, you mostly work with other lawyers, right? So you work with people who have, or paralegals or, legal assistants, but they have a similar background to what you have. You kind of all speak the same language, you understand what each other does, that kind of thing. And in government, that may be different depending on where you are, but if you're at the Department of Justice, similar, right? And when you're in-house, you're working with, for us, it's like, well, you're talking to commercial folks, you're talking to finance folks, but you might also be talking to pilots or flight attendants, or, you're kind of working with people who come from a much broader array of backgrounds. And so, developing, I think the soft skills are kind of the ability to translate what you do to someone who, doesn't come from your same background, and kind of convey why what you do is important to what they want to accomplish, right? And so kind of those translation skills. And then I think relationship skills, they're very important in government and law firms also, but, they're really important in-house. I think like building kind of relationships with your business clients so that, again, they want to bring you into things at the beginning. They see you as someone who is helping them, figure out their strategy and helping them accomplish their goals. And again, not someone that they have to kind of bulldoze their way through to get what they want, at the end. So I think, just building those relationships is really critical.
No, that's really helpful. It's, as I often say to people, it's the one area I have no visibility into. So I'm always curious, the kinds of things that are at issue there, because sometimes you don't know it till you're sort of right upon it. So as you probably know, NAPABA also has like a mentorship program where they try to teach, young, folks under 40 who are young partners how to market. And so they often have an opportunity to speak to other in-house lawyers who are connected to NAPABA, which I think is phenomenal, because as I often say, when I grew up in my Chinese household, nobody taught me how to ask for things. It was quite the opposite. Right. So, trying to learn a different skill set, I think, is really important as successful lawyers. But, from your perspective, for those younger lawyers who are just learning their craft of, marketing and getting out and having to go pitch for clients and things like that, what are some of the things that, from all the positions that you've had that you think are successful, when outside lawyers come and talk to in-house counsel? I remember, after 17 years in government, when I first came to private practice, I literally said, I don't know how to ask for work. Somebody has to tell me the words, because the words are not innately inside of me, right? And so I think back to that time, and I think to the younger folks, what are some of the things that are attractive or resonate with in-house lawyers when outside counsel are presenting themselves?
Yeah, well, so I think for me, what I look for in an outside lawyer is obviously someone with great expertise, someone with really good judgment. But for us, I think it's someone who really has taken the time to understand our business. And, sometimes it's people we've worked with for a long time. So, they understand our business. But, even if you're kind of coming in new and pitching, again, just taking the time to read, understand, learn kind of what are our business, what's our business, what are our issues, what kind of things are our executives probably thinking about, and knowing that before you come in to try and pitch on a matter, I think is really important. If you come in and try to pitch on a legal matter, but you kind of aren't displaying that you've kind of looked at the, you don't seem familiar with the 5 other cases we've had in this space or the issues that other airlines have had in this space, that's probably not going to go as well, right? So I think kind of doing that homework beforehand. And then I think, showing, again, if you're coming in new, you're not someone we've maybe hired before, showing your willingness to kind of invest in learning and, not charging us for it, right? I mean, we want you to, again, take the time to spend time with folks in different areas of our business, kind of learn the subject matter of what the case is about, even if it's not directly relevant to the case. It's really important. And also it's important to both, whether it's a case or whether it's a transaction, to doing the deal or litigating the case, but it's also important to just giving us good practical advice, because the other thing that, we look for at outside counsel is, and part of the understanding our business is so that, when you give us advice, you understand what is feasible for us to do and what isn't, right? Because it's kind of easy as an outside lawyer to say, well, you should do A, B, and C. And it's like, no, actually our systems just can't do that, right? You need to give advice that is something that people can implement.
Yeah, no. I think that's fantastic advice. I was reading something and I forget, but I think you made a comment about, part of the reason why your father was able to immigrate to this country was because of the need at the time to have, folks with his kinds of skills, right? And that I think, I don't know if the article was correct, but I think you sort of, said that he was very fortunate. And I think that's right. I mean, as far as timing is concerned, and that's something I feel like really translates to where we are today as a country, because there's great need, but there's also other things that are going on politically that affect that. As you sit sort of in the position that you're in, how is it that that you see, and you want, if you do, to develop the keys towards fostering a more diverse, inclusive environment, especially, in a large organization like American Airlines, where, your employees are all across the world, and touch all different kinds of, cultures and ethnicity and races. It's, sort of how do you see that in the position that you're in at American now?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I think, I think we as a company and as an industry have a lot of work to do in kind of creating this more kind of diverse and inclusive environment that we need to have. Just American Airlines in particular, and all airlines, we've kind of had these workforces that have historically been somewhat segregated, right? Like pilots, are mostly white men, right? Not a lot of women, not a lot of people of color. The same with, mechanics. So there's a lot of our work groups that I think we really need to open up those opportunities to a more diverse group of people. And we've got tons of initiatives around that, in particular around pilots, around mechanics. And then at the corporate level, I think, we've got similar initiatives. But I think what's also important at the corporate level is just kind of creating a kind of, transparent, and as a company is always going to be hierarchical, but no more hierarchical than necessary kind of environment. I've been at companies, or I've visited companies where, the executives are kind of on an executive floor, and there's security at the desk, and they're very kind of remote from the rest of the company. And, I feel like we're kind of the opposite of, we strive to be the opposite of that here. Everyone has the same, our CEO has the same kind of cubicle that, an analyst right out of college has, right? Everyone has the same setup. Everyone is, accessible. And I think that's kind of the culture that we try to foster. But no, I mean, I think it's a great question because, and I think it's, it's not just for the sake of kind of creating, it's not just diversity for its own sake in the sense, in that sense, but it's also critical to kind of our objectives as a company. Like, for example, with respect to pilots, it's we don't have enough pilots. There's a pilot shortage in this country. And part of the way to, make sure we have enough pilots is to make sure that people who are from groups that maybe historically haven't seen a lot of pilots who look like them, or haven't seen that as a career path, understand that, no, this is a great career path, and it's open to you. So, and I think that's true. That's just an example, but that's true in a lot of our, areas. And so again, it's just in order to get the best talent and to thrive as a company, we need these efforts and initiatives.
No, that's great. And I thank you for those thoughts. The idea of sort of having that play down into all these different areas is, I think, really a way that works towards, as we were talking about, that inclusiveness. And I think everybody benefits from that. So as we come to the end here, I just want to thank you because, as NAPABA put this coffee house podcast together. And really this season is dedicated to sort of exploring how AAPI leaders in our community have really reached these amazing positions and across various industries. It's been a pleasure for me to actually get to talk and to learn about different folks. And we've had a particular focus on Asian American women and how they've done and the ground that they've covered. One last question for you is just sort of like, what do you, where do you want AAPI women or AAPI, communities and lawyers to sort of go in the future? I know what my answer would have been if you had asked me, 20 years ago. And part of that was forming NAPABA. So I feel like, so every time I go to a NAPABA conference, I literally have tears in my eyes because I'm so thrilled that the community has something like that now. But, you're sitting in a younger place than I am. What do you see and what do you want for that future of AAPI lawyers and for AAPI women for us?
Yeah, great question. So, I think, I think a ton of progress has been made over the past, 20 years, but I think, I think there's still some barriers that are kind of harder to surmount than others. And I think a lot of that is kind of when you're talking about getting into the real, like kind of more senior in your career in like the real leadership of the profession, when you're, whether it's like being a general counsel or whether it's being a partner who's got, a lot of business or kind of reaching those leadership levels. And I think part of it is, part of the issue there is around kind of the biases in people's perception of what leaders are. And I think, I hear this a lot when I'm talking to kind of young lawyers. They'll say things like, well, people perceive me as like a worker bee, as someone who will like get the work done and get it done well, but they don't perceive me as like a leader of people or, someone who's going to, we're going to put in front of a client is going to win the business. And so I think working to kind of, overcome that bias to try and get rid of those stereotypes, but also I think helping, coach younger lawyers on kind of how they can really display those leadership skills. It's kind of two sides of coming at the problem, which, undoubtedly has to do with a lot of external bias, but also there are, things that you can do in your own career to try and, overcome that and surmount that. And so I think like a lot of the NAPABA programs you're talking about on the in-house side, there's, a great community of Asian American general counsels who are focused on kind of identifying up and coming in-house lawyers, kind of getting them in the pipeline to be general counsels in the future, mentoring them. And that happens, at conferences and one-on-one and through a ton of different, programs. So, I think there's a ton of effort going on in this area. And I think it's definitely yielding results, but, there's definitely more to be done.
Well, that's fantastic. So unfortunately, we're at the end here, but Priya, I just really want to thank you because this has been very insightful and actually really very interesting to listen to because of the myriad of things that you've done in your I'm going to say still early career. So there's many more steps ahead of you. But I really want to thank you for that. NAPABA has been great about putting this together. And it's part of, what you say about trying to educate others, trying to reach out to others and trying to really have sort of a broader base effect. So I just want to thank you, but I also want to thank American Airlines because I know they've been incredibly supportive of the work that we do at NAPABA, the work that we've done in the AAPI community. And with you at the legal helm there, we know that that's going to continue. So we look forward to many great things that we're going to work on together in the future.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me and I really enjoyed the conversation.
Great. Thank you.